It's now my great, great pleasure to introduce a friend of mine who I've known for well over 10 years. I know he really needs no introduction in front of this group, but you probably best remember him as the author of Your Erroneous Zones, Sky's the Limit, Pulling Your Own Strings, You'll See It When You Believe It, Your Sacred Self, Real Magic, Dr. Wayne Dyer.
What I want to talk about here is almost, it's like doing a somersault, if you will, into the unimaginable. And what happens is that you sort of get on this path, and this path takes you to places, and even though I've written about banishing all doubt and really surrendering and trusting in this divine intelligence that is a part of all things, there is still the ego part of each and every one of us, including myself, that begins to question whether or not I'm capable of doing things that really transcend what my physical experience has been up until now in my life. And then to sit down and write about them. You know, before I wrote Your Sacred Self, I immersed myself in a lot of really powerful spiritual literature. I read the New Testament for the first time, and I read it with new eyes. And I also read and studied in depth the Course in Miracles, and the Kabbalah, and the Secret Doctrine, and the Urantia book. And these kinds of great tomes of timeless, infinite wisdom all talk about reaching higher and higher places within ourselves. And when I think I was probably most influenced by the New Testament and the Course. And in the New Testament, one of the great quotes that I've used a lot in my life, but haven't really applied as much as I have lately, is from St. John, where he's quoting Jesus as saying, "Even the least among you can do all that I have done, and even greater things." And while that sounds wonderful, and most of us have heard those words and even repeated them, there's still this very vast element of doubt that says, yes, but that's sort of reserved for people who are in, who are in direct contact with God, or who are maybe the boss's son, perhaps. Maybe he can do that, but whether I can do that or not is something. And so I decided to write about this subject of manifesting, the ability to be able to put your attention on what it is that you would like to be able to create, and then to have that show up in your life. And just when I left to write the book, I left home and went across the state. I live in Florida. And I didn't really understand exactly what it is I was going to write, or what these principles were, that they were involved. I knew that there were certain principles involved in being able to have things show up for you in your life and be able to manifest, but I wasn't quite sure what they were. And I decided to really, for the first time in my life, to suspend all of my doubt and to just do what I've been encouraging other people to do, which is to totally, completely surrender and allow, and to know that I'm not alone. I always like that quote from A Course in Miracles, the quote that says, if you knew. It doesn't say if you believed, because a belief is something that other people hand us, and everything that is handed to us by other people outside of us, or other institutions, or books, or tapes, or all of that, it still comes to us with an element of doubt. But everything that we know is the direct experience. And when we have the direct experience of something, like, there's a difference between knowing about God and knowing God. Knowing about God is really what we have been told. And so we can know about it, and we can talk about it, we can read about it, we can study it, and so on. But to know God is to have the direct experience. And when you have a knowing, And in the Course it says, if you knew who walked beside you at all times on this path that you have chosen, you could never experience fear again, if you knew that. And so it's like walking up in front of this audience here today and taking a microphone and knowing that I'm on purpose and that what I'm doing is a reflection of the sacred part of me, and sort of removing this ego out of my life and out of my presentation. That whatever it is that I'm supposed to say and whatever I need to say will be here, the words will be here, and I don't have to be concerned about that. I don't have to fill myself with anxiety and stress about it and wonder if I'm going to forget something, or if I'm going to fall down, or if I'm going to start slobbering on myself, or if I'm going to, whatever it is that the ego keeps telling you could happen if you're not really careful. If you have this knowing, and it seems to me that if you have this knowing, it applies in virtually every area of your life. I was reading an interesting little novel that someone handed me the other day in Chattanooga, Tennessee. It's called The Legend of Bagger Vance. And it's a book that was just come out. It's about golf. And it's sort of a play on the Bhagavad Gita, which is another one of the books that I studied before writing this Manifesting Your Destiny book. And in the Gita, in the Bhagavad Gita, which is the holy book that Gandhi based his life upon, and it's a very short story. You can read it in an afternoon. It's a story of this great warrior, the greatest warrior of his time. His name is Arjuna, and Arjuna is on the field of battle, and the armies are lined up, and his charioteer begins to talk to him, who is really Krishna, disguised as a charioteer, Krishna meaning God. And Krishna begins to have these conversations with Arjuna. And the Bhagavad Gita is 18 of these conversations, each one of which you can read in about 15 minutes or 20 minutes. But as Gandhi said, you can study it for a lifetime. And this legend of Bagger Vance is sort of a takeoff on that, where the caddy in this great match between these two great golfers back in 1931, Walter Hagen and Bobby Jones, and the caddy begins to give advice. And it's a fictional kind of it's a wonderful, wonderful story. And in there, the caddy is saying to the golfer that there are really four paths to reaching what I call, in your sacred self, I call this the heightened awareness. So that what happens when you reach this state of heightened awareness is that you go beyond just survival, and you go beyond just all of the things that your physical body has told you you're capable of or incapable of. And you transcend all of the stuff of the physical world and get into a higher and higher and higher state, where ultimately you reach this state in which you can literally learn to manifest. And so this state, Maslow talked about this state of higher awareness, in which there are four paths to reach, according to the caddy. And when he described this state, because I was fortunate to have been a student of Dr. Maslow's back in the 60s. He died in 1970 at the same time, on the same day that I received my doctorate. And it was almost as if he had passed the baton on to me and said, I've explained all of this stuff to the intellectuals and to the academic community. Now you take it and explain it to the cab drivers. So welcome, cab drivers, because I was one myself. Thanks. And when Maslow described these people, one of the first qualities he discussed in describing what these people are like. See, the thing I loved about Maslow, and another great teacher of mine, Fritz Radel, was that he suggested that instead of studying man's potential for greatness from the point of view of what is wrong with us and what we can't do, and putting labels on ourselves, like you study psychology and self-development and you find out who the sociopaths are and who the neurotics are, and what the difference between neurosis and psychosis is, and all of these labels that we place on people. And the study of humanity tends to be a study, if you will, of the ability to see who fits into what categories and what compartments we can place on people. If you read people like Kierkegaard, he says, once you label me, you negate me, the great Danish theologian. So we have to be very careful about placing labels on people. And Maslow said very clearly that there are people that achieve at very high levels in their lives and live a different way. They don't live in the same context, and they literally live in different dimensions. And they've discovered that there are different dimensions. And these dimensions are not just dimensions that they peer into and look at, but they're absolutely able to leave this dimension of reality that is based exclusively on surviving, if you will, and just making it and handling the details of your physical life. But they live from their divine selves. They understand this idea that we're really not human beings having a spiritual experience, but that it's the other way around, that we are all spiritual beings having a human experience. And so as spiritual beings, they have a very different emphasis on what their lives are about and what is possible for them. Because in the world of spirit, of course, there are no limits, there are no boundaries, there is no form. There's none of the stuff that we associate with what it means to be a human being, maybe having an occasional spiritual experience. Their emphasis is on this higher part of themselves. And when I ask Dr. Maslow personally, what do you mean when you talk about self-actualization? And he had written about this in Toward a Psychology of Being and some of his other great works, Psychia and so on, and Motivation. He said it's basically just learning to be independent of the good opinion of other people. Essentially, if you can get that down, if you can really learn to live your life from the perspective of getting away from the tribe, you know? Because the tribe, and when I use the word the tribe is whatever organizational groups, whether it's your family or whether it's your community or whether it's your religious hierarchy or whether it's your business or extended family or whatever. This tribe has a certain consciousness and it has a certain way of functioning. And it does evolve. But if you are going to learn to become a manifester, which is what my talk is about here today, if you are going to learn to be able to put your attention on what it is that you would like to create and co-create your life and have it show up and have a knowing that it can, you're going to have to leave the tribe. Because the tribal consciousness is one which, like if you go to your tribe and you say, you know, I've figured out a way to leave you. And I've figured out a way to go beyond the restrictions that you have placed on me. And I really feel a sense of my own individuality and my own spiritual connection. And I've made conscious contact with God. And I no longer feel it necessary to be a member of this tribe. Your tribe will do everything that it can to keep you from being able to go beyond its limitations. That's the nature of the tribe. So that if you're going to evolve at a higher level of consciousness, the first thing that you have to learn to do is understand that if you're going to evolve with the tribe, you're going to do it very, very slowly. And Maslow said that in order to be able to speed up your evolution, to speed it up. See, it's the rate of speed at which you are evolving that we're talking about. How can I indeed go beyond this very slow pace that the culture moves at? See, most of the changes that we make as a people, we wonder often, you know, about the spiritual changes that take place, or even just any kind of changes that take place in the world. And we ask ourselves, like, how does this take place? Is it the people who are in power, who are the leaders of the tribe, who say, okay, you know, it really isn't nice to treat people this way. We really shouldn't have something like apartheid. You know, that's really not a nice way to be. And slavery isn't something that, you know, we should be doing anymore. So those of us in power are going to say, let's not do that any longer. And those communist dictatorships and the Berlin Wall and all of those things, was it all the people who were in charge of the whole Soviet hierarchy 10 years ago, who all got together and said, you know, let's disband this. This isn't a nice way to treat people. It didn't happen that way. See, the tribe comes along. It's just like not smoking in airplanes. I mean, it's like to break it down to something that you can really relate to, you know. I mean, how long have we known that it's immoral and improper to require people who are restricted to breathing the same air at 40,000 feet to require everybody to breathe in this poison because a few people have addictions? We've known for a long time that this is immoral. The flight attendants knew it. They were lobbying for it and so on. And the tribe ultimately, Congress or the rule makers, ultimately passed a rule. But it took a long, long time for them to pass the rule. And the reason that they passed the rule was because of a change in consciousness, because it's only through a change in consciousness that the world is going to be transformed. It isn't going to take place. In reading The Secret Doctrine, Madame Blavatsky, back in the 19th century, who was this unbelievable woman, way ahead of her time, back in the 1850s and 60s and 70s, writing about the founder of the Theosophist movement, traveling all over the world, a Russian lady who lived in India for a long time, and probably had more influence on the early writers of this century, people like Yeats and Jack London, even people like Jung and Freud. Was very influential in Gandhi's life as a young man. And she predicted in The Secret Doctrine, she said, in the last 25 years of the millennium, and in the first 11 years of the next millennium, there will be a revolution taking place on your planet, on this planet, that will transcend anything we've ever known before. And this revolution will be much grander than the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution and the intellectual revolution and the information and technological revolutions. This will become a spiritual revolution. But the leaders of this revolution will not be people who are in power, despite the fact of what you hear in the convention debates, you know, about who's going to be our leaders. I mean, do any of you honestly ever watch those things and say, these are our leaders? I want to be your leader, I'm going to lead. Do you really? I mean, these are people who just are reflecting whatever consciousness it is that we have present in the collective. I mean, when you look back at the Renaissance, do you honestly think that the leaders of the Renaissance were the mayors and the presidents of Italy and in its cities? Or wasn't it the writers and the philosophers and the artists and the people who were, and the scientists and the business, the people who were, you know, and who were the great leaders of the democracy in Greece? Do you think of Aristotle and Plato and Socrates? Or do you look up, you know, who won the elections? And Madame Blavatsky said that beginning in the last quarter of the millennium, last 25 years, and in the next 11 years, there will be ushered in a whole new transformation on the planet. And these leaders will not be people who are in power, but they will be school teachers, they will be musicians, they will be doctors, physicians, they will be lawyers, they will be cab drivers, they will be dancers, they will come out of the consciousness, and the leaders, the elected political officials will begin to reflect that consciousness. And I just feel that I happen to be one of those people that is a spokesman for this revolution. I wrote Erroneous Zones in 1975, and I was a school teacher when I wrote it. Marianne Williamson was a singer in nightclubs. Louise Hay was a dancer. Deepak Chopra and Bernie Siegel, Larry Dossey were physicians. And you look at all of the people who are in this conference, this Sacred Living Conference, and you go back and you will find that these are people who felt a compelling inner urgency to speak out, and were, in fact, independent of the good opinion of others. We're not focused on whether or not, you see, the mantra of the tribe is, but what will they think? And you have to be very, very careful of that mantra. Because if your consciousness is on what will they think, you will not be able to reach the level that I'm speaking about here today. You have to go beyond that. And what will they think has to become something that isn't even relevant in your life. And it doesn't mean taking on a stance of being obstinate, obdurate, inconsiderate, uncaring, nothing like that at all. It is operating from a very different perspective. One of Maslow's contemporaries, a great teacher, was a professor of mine at Wayne State University when I was doing doctoral work in the 1960s. His name was Fritz Redl, R-E-D-L. And Fritz and Dr. Maslow were very close. Fritz also was a contemporary of Carl Jung's and studied in Austria with him. And he had a seminar in Detroit, and he was like the most popular professor at the university. And when I was a doctoral student, you put in advance, like when you first got admitted to the program, for when you were finishing up your dissertation, to get into this seminar that he would conduct, because there were only 6 to 10 people in it, and we would meet every Tuesday night for 3 hours and just do this very close dialogue with Dr. Redl. And Dr. Maslow also came to the course. And one time, he came into the class, and I was 29 years old in 1969, just before I took my orals, after what I call 7 years of anals. It's the way you feel after you've been in that program for a long time. And he brought in this little story, and he read this story to the class. And the story said, a self-actualizing person, a person who has reached this heightened level of awareness, who has all these qualities. And by the way, I wrote an entire book on these qualities called The Sky's the Limit about 15 years ago. It's about applying self-actualization in your daily life. And he said the self-actualizing person shows up at a dinner party, and everybody at the dinner party is wearing black tie and very formal attire. And this person shows up in a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, a baseball hat, and tennis shoes. What does he do? Or she do? Okay? And he walks out. Now, this was after a whole semester of studying these principles. And each of us wanted to really prove how cool we were, you know, and how self-actualized we were. I did. And I wanted to really show that I finally got this, you know. So and he said, write about this, in his Viennese accent, write about this for 15 minutes. So we each wrote a full page or so on what and then when he came in, each one of us would read our answers. And essentially our answers went like this. This is someone who would not be concerned with this, who wouldn't pay attention to it, who wouldn't leave, who wouldn't make an issue of it, wouldn't draw attention to it, would just go on as if nothing had happened. It wouldn't be something that would be of any concern to them at all. And each one of us sort of wrote something around that theme. And he would note each one of us. And then at the end he said, "None of you got it." He said the answer is, he wouldn't notice. Now this shows you how far you've got to go to reach this stage. What he was saying here is that you have to try to imagine people who, when they see another person, only see the unfolding of God in that person and do not relate to appearances. Don't even notice it. It is not only is it of no concern, it doesn't register. So we have got a lot of work to do this weekend. And one of the things that we have to do is to understand these four paths that Bagger Vance was trying to tell these great golfers. And the four paths are very simply, the first path is what he called the path of discipline. So you're assuming that you want to learn how to hit a golf ball, or how to play tennis, or how to write, or how to dance the Macarena, or whatever it is that you want to learn to do. That the first path is called this path of discipline, where you just go out and you practice it. Now I'm talking about another discipline here, which is the discipline of being able to manifest. And I have practiced it myself, and many of the things, very much like even speaking here in front of you today, or sitting down to write, or playing tennis, which is something I do, or to run marathons, which is something that I do. This kind of learning a new skill involves, the first thing is just the path of discipline. He said then the second path you learn after you've practiced and practiced and practiced and practiced is called the path of wisdom. And when you learn the path of wisdom, you begin to see the strategy. You begin to use the mind, the intellect, the brain, the thoughts, where the center of your being is here inside the head. And you apply that to learning how to run, how to pace yourself, how to swing, how to hold the hands in a certain way, how to hit a topspin, how to hit a backhand, how to slice a ball, how to volley, how to hit an overhead. Whatever it is that you are learning, you apply the intellect. It's the second path to this stage. Then he said the third path is called the path of unconditional love, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this presentation. And this path of unconditional love, you see, the first two paths will always destroy you. The path of discipline, the path of wisdom, ultimately, it'll just exhaust you. You'll just wear yourself out. And you'll never get it anyway. You'll only get so far. And the mind will then begin to play tricks on you. And your fatigue will destroy you. So the path of unconditional love is like the path of God. You find the Spirit within you. And then you take your training and you take your intellect and you transcend it and you just allow. Until you reach the fourth path, the highest path, which is called the path of surrender. And this is the path where the little mind surrenders to the big mind. Where you begin to transcend some of the paradigms of your life. And I want to talk a little bit about these paradigms and how they influence us. But before I do, I'd like to read something to you. It's a poem, and it's written by Valerie Cox. I don't know Valerie. And I don't even know where this came from. It came from a stockbroker who was been trying to get me to go with his firm for a long time, and he sends me every month something very inspirational, and asked me if I'd like to consider it and so on. And it's called The Cookie Thief, this poem by Valerie Cox. I think it appears in one of the books someplace, but I'm not sure. And here's how it goes. A woman was waiting at an airport one night with several long hours before her flight. She hunted for a book in the airport shop, bought a bag of cookies, and found a place to drop. She was engrossed in her book, but happened to see that the man beside her, as bold as could be, grabbed a cookie or two from the bag between, which she tried to ignore to avoid a scene. She munched cookies and watched the clock as the gutsy cookie thief diminished her stock. She was getting more irritated as the minutes ticked by, thinking, if I wasn't so nice, I'd blacken his eye. With each cookie she took, he took one too. When only one was left, she wondered what he'd do. With a smile on his face and a nervous laugh, he took the last cookie and broke it in half. He offered her half as he ate the other. She snatched it from him and thought, oh, brother, this guy has some nerve, and he's also rude. Why, he didn't even show any gratitude. She had never known when she had been so galled, and sighed with relief when her flight was called. She gathered her belongings and headed to the gate, refusing to look back at that thieving ingrate. She boarded the plane and sank in her seat, then sought her book, which was almost complete. As she reached in her baggage, she gasped with surprise. There was her bag of cookies in front of her eyes. Now, if mine are here, she moaned with despair, then the others were his, and he tried to share. Too late to apologize, she realized with grief that she was the rude one, the ingrate, the thief. Isn't that great? Valerie Cox. So many of us, including myself, have this idea that we know what's going on. And we become so attached to that knowing that it's impossible for us to let in an idea that there might be a totally different reality there. I mean, I can't tell you. I have 8 children. I can't tell you how many times with my children I have put my keys someplace and accused one of them of moving those damn keys. Just when I need to go, and now I gotta go, and I haven't got, and now the keys, and where did you put those keys, and the whole thing, and then I go back and look in my pocket from the clothes I wore yesterday, and there are my keys. I usually just sort of sneak off, and how many times you find yourself absolutely certain of a truth of some kind, and then find that there is a different reality. So I call that whole perception today the cookie thief. And to watch yourself. And to ask you to, as I go into some of these principles and some of these things that I think are really relevant for helping you to be able to manifest your destiny and to understand these spiritual principles that are involved in the manifestation of your destiny. And that the paradigms that you get stuck in tell you that these things are not possible. And as you begin to relate to a new awareness, you begin to understand what Jesus was talking about in this notion that even the least among you can do all that I have done and even greater things. It means that each and every one of us have this gift, the gift of fish and loaves, the ability to manifest, to put our attention on what it is that we would like to be able to create and to have it manifest and show up in our lives. To be able to heal, to be able to be transcendent in the sense of being a spiritual being first. And in order to do this, it's almost as if you have to understand how the difference between the world that we find ourselves immersed in, called the physical world, the world of form, and that which causes it. If I could just take this room, and let's say this stage, and divide it so that everything to my right, everything over here on my right, represented everything in the physical world, everything that you notice, everything that you observe, your body, your family, your bank account, your clothing, your personality, your thoughts. Virtually everything that you notice over here in the physical world is over here to my right. And then if you were to ask yourself, what causes this? And somehow, even though we know that there's a oneness to it all, just for purposes of this discussion here this morning, we were to divide it and say, that which causes this over here is over here on the left. So that to my left, in this room, everything that is the cause of that which is over here is on this side of the room. And getting to a place in your life where you have given up, which most of us have, we have forfeited our ability to move back and forth between the world that we notice and that which causes it. Somehow we are stuck in a paradigm which says, I, who I am, is not able to participate in this act of creating that which is to over here in the physical world. This is not what I do. This is something that is done by someone or something else. It just sort of shows up. And so I can remember, see, I grew up in a series of foster homes when I was a little boy in an orphanage out in Mount Clemens, Michigan. And I can remember when I was about 3 or 4 years old, we had a driveway that came up to this home. It was like an old farmhouse. And when you drove up on the right, there was a fence, and there was some dirt there along the fence, and there were these lilies of the valley. And lilies of the valley were the flowers that I can always relate to. Whenever I smell a lily of the valley, I go right back to being at 231 Town Hall Road in Mount Clemens in 1943 and 44 and 45 and 46 as a little boy. And on the other side of the road, on the left-hand side of the road, there was this wide patch of dirt, and we used to plant tomatoes in there every spring. And Mrs. Scarf was the lady who ran this place. And she would take all of us out there. There were a whole large number of us living there in this little... At the time, I thought it was a mansion. I thought this was the largest house there ever was. There were some 50 children living there. And when I went back to see it, when I was an adult, it was a tiny little house. It's a different perception. I couldn't imagine that many children could have lived there, but she never said no to people who were in need, and we were people in need. And what I recall is Mrs. Scarf would have these tomato seeds in these little packets. And I've often told people that when I was a little boy, I was a scurvy elephant. You know, I came home from school in the 3rd grade, and I asked Mrs. Scarf what a scurvy elephant was. She said, I've never heard such a thing. She called the principal, and because I told her, I said I had heard Mrs. Smith, who was my 3rd grade teacher, or Mrs. Poole rather, my 3rd grade teacher, telling Mrs. Smith, who was the principal, that Wayne Dyer was in her classroom and that he was a scurvy elephant. So she called and she said, oh no, that's Wayne. He gets everything mixed up. I was there. She didn't say he was a scurvy elephant in her classroom. She said that he was a disturbing element in her classroom. And one of the things I think you have to learn to be, if you want to know this path, the path of surrender, the little mind to the big mind, is you have to be a scurvy elephant. You have to be. You have to get out of the tribe, the tribal consciousness. You have to leave the tribe. But you don't have to tell the tribe you're leaving. In fact, one of the keys that I write about in this new book on manifesting is that you have to keep it private. Because the minute that you begin to share what you are learning, the ego gets involved and you want to convince somebody, and then you take away the energy, the flow of the energy. So, as a scurvy elephant, and I remember reading E.E. Cummings later, I'd use a lot of poetry in my talks and in my writing because I taught poetry and wrote poetry and still do. And E.E. Cummings was a great scurvy elephant poet. Didn't even use uppercase letters. Yeah, I love that. He said, to be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best night and day to make you just like everybody else means to fight the greatest battle there is to fight and never stop fighting. And you have to learn that. You have to learn and be willing. You have to be willing. When we were planting the tomatoes along the patch of dirt leading up to the farmhouse on Town Hall Road, I can remember she had a sprinkler can and a little digger. And we would dig a little hole, and then we would pour the seeds in, and then she'd put the dirt over the top, and then we'd put water on it. And I said to her, well, where are the tomatoes? Because I was 3 or 4 years old. I want to know, where are the tomatoes? She'd say, well, the tomatoes will be here in about 2 or 3 months. I'd say, yeah, but where do they come from? She'd say, well, they come from the seeds. And I said, well, do you mean that there's tomatoes in the seeds? She said, not exactly. I said, well, where are the tomatoes that are going to produce where do they come from? She said, trust me. Trust me, they'll be here. Just watch. You see? Now, I can remember this like it was yesterday. I took a handful of those tomato seeds and I stuck them in my jeans pocket in the back. And we had a chicken coop there. And I went out behind the chicken coop. And there was a paring knife that we used for plucking chickens. And I took that knife and I started cutting open these tomato seeds to find out if there were some tiny little miniature tomatoes inside of these. That's what I was thinking when I was a little boy, and it's as if it was yesterday. And all I found when I opened up these little tomato seeds was dust. Just brown dust. That's all it was. And it was like in that moment, I think that began my metaphysical journey as a little tiny boy. Because I sensed that there was something more to the creation of that which is in the physical world than the explanation that I was being given, that I should just trust it. You see, inside of a tomato seed, which will produce a tomato, which will produce more tomatoes, as I quoted in You'll See It When You Believe It. Anyone can count the number of seeds in an apple, but no one can count the number of apples in a seed. And when you look at the dust that is to become tomatoes, you realize that this is what is called a future pull. This is just a potentiality. Inside of that seed, there's nothing even resembling a tomato. What's in there is a potential, a future pull toward tomatoness. And if you begin to discover that and study that, that's what discudy means. I knew what I was saying. You take that dust, that quiet dust that is inside that tomato seed, and you put it under a very powerful microscope, and you magnify it, and you look at it, and you'll find little tiny particles, molecules and atoms. Inside the atoms, you'll find electrons and neutrons and protons and croutons and who knows, all kinds of stuff in there. And if you see all of these things moving around, and you start to take the spaces out that are between those particles, and then take the particles and put them under a stronger microscope, and examine them, and you'll see the same thing. You'll see inside the particle spaces, and then you'll see particles, tiny, tiny particles. And if you keep doing this until you get to subatomic particles, and then you get to subatomic particles, all of which have new and more fancy names as we examine this, ultimately what you get to when you get the tiniest, the last particle with no spaces left in it, and you look inside that, you find that there's no dust there at all. that there's just something called energy that is formless, that is a wave, that turns into a particle. And you are made of the same energy. One drop of human protoplasm collided with another in one instant. And if you look at that drop of human protoplasm and that which it collided, you will find that if you keep studying it and going further and further, tinier and tinier and tinier, ultimately you come to no thing. To no thing. And so it is out of no thing, out of the absence of thing and form, that the world of form is created. And it doesn't matter what we call this energy. As Alan Watts explained to me, you can't get wet, Wayne, he said, from the word water. It's not what we call it. So if you want to call it God, or you want to call it soul, or you want to call it spirit, or you want to call it consciousness, or you want to call it Louise or Frank, it doesn't matter what you call it, because it is not what you call it, even though we fight wars over what we call it. And so what we want to discover is, why have we forfeited our ability to oscillate back and forth between this world over here, which is the cause of everything over here? There is a universal intelligence. Una means one. Verse means song. There's a one song, an intelligence that is in everything in the physical world, everything in the physical domain has this universal intelligence. Now, the thing about a universal intelligence, it means the characteristics or the qualities of this divine organizing universal intelligence is that if it's universal, that means it is everywhere, doesn't it? Which means that it is no place that it is not. Which means that our belief in our egos, which tells us somehow that I am separate from it, is a myth, is an illusion. If it's everywhere, you can't be separate from it. There can be no place that it is not. So that if you begin to process what it is that you perceive to be missing from your life, that you would like to be able to manifest for yourself, what you're really beginning to do is understand that when you manifest, when you bring something into your world, from being over here on the left-hand side, you're just manifesting another aspect of yourself. You're not creating, you're just redistributing, you're just bringing things into your world. Emily Dickinson had this wonderful poem. And in this poem, she has this line, or these few lines. Holding up a handful of dirt, she says, "This quiet dust was gentlemen and ladies and lads and girls, was laughter and ability and sighing and frocks and curls. This passive place, a summer's nimble mansion where bloom and bees fulfilled their oriental circuit, then ceased like these. This quiet dust was gentlemen and ladies and lads and girls, was laughter and ability and sighing and frocks and curls." Everything in the physical domain is in a state of change. And when Lao Tzu, the great author of the Tao, 5 centuries before the birth of Christ, and when Jesus, and when Buddha, and Muhammad, and Zoroaster, and all of the great spiritual teachers of all time that we consider to be our greatest spiritual teachers, were asked the question, "What is real, Master? What is real?" Their answers were always the same. That is real, which never changes. So now you have to find a place within yourself that meets that criteria for real, the authentic you. Who is that authentic you? And how do you find it? Certainly we know it's not our body. It's not mine. Certainly this body that is up here now talking to you is different than the one that talked 20 years ago. I hold a hair up on the pillow in the morning to my wife, morning after morning. The great metaphysical question, what held it in yesterday? I don't know. You ask your same question about that which is falling, or that which is wrinkling, or that which used to be a different color. And you know that there's a part of you that is in this physical domain. And there's also a part of you that is noticing it, that is observing it, that is witnessing it. And this witness, this part of you that observes that change, has never changed. I was up in Massachusetts running not too long ago. I go out in the morning and I generally run 10 miles every morning, some mornings 15. And I've been running every day since 1976. Some call that an obsession. But you brush your teeth every day, and you don't call yourself obsessed, you know. You make a big doo-doo every day, you know. You don't say you're obsessed. I run every day, all right? And if I'm obsessed, that's fine, because I'm independent of your damn opinions. No, I'm just kidding. Where did that come from? And I was running, and it was about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. I went out and I did a long run. It was in March. It was a beautiful day. I was in Worcester, Massachusetts. Worcester. And my wife was standing on the other side of I was on a high school track. I was staying at a Holiday Inn there. I had spoken there the night before. Got up, ran, and there was a fence between my wife, and she was out there like screaming, come on, we're gonna have breakfast. It was just getting light, and I was just so energized. I felt so terrific. And there was a fence about this high. And I ran to go across the field, and I came across this fence, and I jumped over the fence. I just jumped it, ran up to it and hurled it. And she screamed at me, she said, you can't do that. You're 55 years old. You don't jump fences when you're 55 years old, you could get killed. And I said to her, I forgot. Now the fact is, the part of me that is in there that has been noticing all of these changes has never aged at all. Don't you do this sometimes? Don't you look in the mirror sometimes and say, who is that old fart looking back at me? You know? What the hell's going on here? And you know that when you were 12 and when you were 19 and when you were 23 and 40, I was walking down the beach. I live in Florida, and I saw a guy who had to be 95 years old if he was a day. And a woman walked by with one of those thong bathing suits, which I don't understand at all. I mean, all my kids spend all day long trying to get those things out of there, you know, those wedgies. And they got them, they put them in there, you know. And she walks by with one of these things on, and this guy's 95 years old, at least. And he can hardly turn, and she gets by, and he goes, you see, the noticer hasn't aged a bit. The noticer doesn't know that that's out of the question, you know? The noticer just is ageless and timeless. That's what you have to discover. That who you are is not only this garage where you have parked the noticer, but who you are literally is that which has never changed. And that which has never changed, in order to understand that, you have to just transcend a couple of key paradigms. The most important of these paradigms that you must transcend if you're going to discover the sacred self. And I've written a book called Your Sacred Self, with the idea being to understand that there are really two parts to this business of being human. There's two of us in every one of these bodies. There is the part of us that believes that we are separate and that we are special and that we are important and that we need to achieve and that we must compare ourselves to others. That's the ego. That's the part of us that keeps us from knowing this higher part of ourselves, because it believes that we are separate from God. It believes that we are separate from each other. It doesn't understand the Sioux Indian notion that no tree has branches so foolish as to fight among themselves. No tree would have a branch that could fight with other branches and survive. We haven't learned that yet. The ego part of us is the part of us that believes first and foremost in our separateness and secondly in our specialness. I've come here to deliver a message to you that you are not special. If you are special, it means someone else isn't. And if we're all special, we don't need a word like special. So this idea somehow of understanding divine intelligence as being something that is everywhere is also in me. The highest part of you, what I call the sacred part of you, only wants one thing. It doesn't care if you're right or wrong. It doesn't care if you win or lose. It doesn't care how much you get. It doesn't care if you're better than someone else. It's not interested in your goals. It's not interested in what you achieve and how much you get and how much you put away and who you defeat. It's not interested in that. The higher part of you only wants one thing. It wants you to be at peace. My teacher, the great Nisargadatta Maharaj, said very clearly, enlightenment means to be immersed in and surrounded by peace at all moments in your life. And anybody in your life who sends you away from that peace is a teacher, a divine teacher, and is your soulmate. Your soulmate is not the person who just agrees with everything you say and likes asparagus just like you do and gets up early in the morning the same way you do and likes the same newspapers and reads the same books and we have the same ideas. I go to say something and he says it before I even said it. We both like cabbage, we both like to get it. I give you 3 more weeks, max, in that relationship. Your soulmate is the person you can't stand, who keeps showing up. Because that person who's in your life, who's not only not on your path, but's not even on an entrance ramp to your path, and is not going to be in your lifetime, is someone who is a divine master disguised as a manipulative, uncaring, inconsiderate bastard. Right? Because everybody in your life who can tell you and show you in any given moment that you have not mastered yourself is your teacher. So you need to pay homage to these people. What Castaneda called petty tyrants. My father, who abandoned us, who walked away, who never paid any support in his lifetime, who spent 5 years in prison, who was an alcoholic, who abused us, who left, who just walked away, was my great teacher, taught me forgiveness. My daughter, Serena, who actually said to me, I can't really believe that you wrote a book on how to raise children. I just can't believe it. And she was 10 years old. She stands like this. Head rolled back, eyes on the back of her head. I said, Serena, you've got to, every day she gives me advice on how to be a better parent. I said, Serena, you've got to stop telling me what kind of parent to be. You've got to start taking responsibility yourself for what kind of a parent I am. She looked at me like, you want to run that one by me one more time? 10 years old. You're telling me I should be responsible for the kind of father you are? I said, exactly. I said, before you came here, you had a great lesson to learn. We all have a heroic mission. When you were nowhere, you've heard me give talks, when you were in nowhere before you came to now here, it's all the same. And when you were in nowhere, you had lessons. She said, I don't remember any of this. I said, your memory is not reliable. You don't remember being in a crib. You don't remember what you had for breakfast last Thursday. You don't remember, what you dreamt about. You don't remember hardly anything. You can't even remember what your assignment is from one day to the next in school. Your memory, don't judge this to be true by your memory. Trust me, this is true. Before you come here, you have to pick your parents. You pick the people that you need to fulfill the mission you're on. And some of us have to go through harder times. Some of us go through easy times. You picked me to be a father. And you picked mom to be your mother. So you should be taking responsibility rather than blaming me for what kind of a father I am. She stopped and she said, you mean to tell me that I picked you to be my father before I came here? I said, exactly. She said, I must have been in a hurry. I said, honey, when you're making important decisions like this, don't rush them. Don't rush. But the greatest little scurvy elephant I have is my daughter, Summer. My wife went away. She's working on a book that she'll be finishing up in a couple of months on a spiritual approach to childbirth and infancy care. And for years, I've always told her that, I have to go away to write, and I hear these voices, and when it's time, I just surrender to that voice, and I have to go away and write. And you understand that. Well, she said to me one morning last year, I've been hearing the same voice that you've been hearing. I said, honey, if you're hearing voices, I'm a trained therapist. I can help you with that. She said, no, I'm hearing your voices, the same voices, and I have to go away. We live in Florida. She rented a house on Maui, just to make sure, And she went away, and I took care of the kids for the whole month of October last year, all 7 at home. So I hired 3 additional people to come in and, not because I couldn't handle it, you understand, but. And I'm making breakfast for them one morning after driving. One has to go here, another one has to go to that school. I have to pick them up. You know what that's like. And I'm making breakfast, and they like waffles. So I was making waffles over behind the table where they sit over here. And I was at the toaster with these frozen waffles. Well, some of them like them dark, and some of them like them light. It's not an easy job. And I was putting the waffles inside the toaster, and all of a sudden I hear Summer, who is now 13, she was 12 at the time, I heard her say to Serena, my 11-year-old, she said out of nowhere, she said, if you didn't have any feet, would you wear shoes? And I turned around, I said, what kind of a question is that? And Serena looks at her, like, if I didn't have any feet, she said, of course not. Summer said, well, then why are you wearing that bra? They're tough. I'm telling you, they're tough. So, these teachers that show up in your life, you see, the ego part of you, the part of you that wants to feel separate and important and special and all of those things, this ego part of you has really one motive, and that is to be right. It really needs to be right. And to be right, it needs to make other people wrong. So this thought inside of you, and people say, well, how do you get the higher part of you to triumph over the ego? That's why I wrote Your Sacred Self. The answer to that is that you begin to ask yourself the question as you're about to respond in your relationships or with anyone in the world, any person at any time, you're about to respond, are you going to be right or are you going to be kind? The higher part of you only wants one thing. Your sacred self wants you to be at peace. That's what enlightenment is. So your response that you are about to give, if it is one of being kind rather than being right, you have allowed the higher part or the sacred part of you to triumph in that one instant. And if you begin practicing that. As you're about to flip somebody the bird, as you're about to yell at a flight attendant or a waitress or somebody who's got your bag or somebody who's done something improper or one of your children or your spouse or whatever, and you're just about to have this discussion and you stop just in a second and say, do I need to be right here or am I going to be kind? Because freedom, the subtitle of Your Sacred Self is making the decision to be free. Freedom is the absolute lack of concern about yourself. When you are independent of the good opinion of other people, what you are really saying is that I am on purpose, and it isn't myself. And who is this self? Rabindranath Tagore, the great Indian poet who won the Pulitzer Prize for Literature in 1927 for a collection of poetry called the Gitanjali, has this discussion with Krishna, with God. And in this discussion he says, I went out alone on my way to my tryst, but who is this me in the dark? I step aside to avoid his presence, but I escape him not. He makes the dust rise from the earth with his swagger. He adds his loud voice to every word I utter. He is my own little self, my Lord. He knows no shame, but I am ashamed to come to thy door in his company. If you can find a way to tame that person inside of you who believes that you are separate from this divine intelligence, you will have begun the first step of mastering the ability to manifest. And it's like the major paradigm that we get stuck in, which often when I talk about this on the radio and on TV across the country, really alienates people. I tell them very, very clearly, we have a fear of being God, and you have to get over that fear. You must understand that this intelligence, this divine, organizing, universal intelligence is everywhere. There are essentially, Alan Watts talked about two theories of nature. The first theory of nature says that that the universe is a monarchy, essentially, and that God is the king, and we are the subjects, and that we are inferior to the king or to the subjects, and that the God is the boss, if you will, and we're separate from the boss. And this gets uncomfortable for people to talk about. It's like God is not only the boss, but God is usually a male. Most of the time a white male. A dead white male in heaven is God, who is keeping track of everything and judging everyone, and you are separate from it. And not only are you separate from it, but you are inferior, and you cannot be trusted because you essentially are a sinner. So you can't really be trusted. Now, the problem with this theory of nature is if you subscribe to it, you will always be lost. The reason that you will always be lost is because if you are essentially separate from and untrustworthy to begin with, you can't even trust in your untrustworthiness. If you're already untrustworthy to begin with, and you say, I'm untrustworthy, you can't even trust that. Why not? Because you're just not trustworthy. And everything that you ever think or act upon will be coming from this essence of you as untrustworthy, and you will always be lost. There's a second theory of nature which says that God is a universal energy. God is love, and in all things, and doesn't judge, and is there for us to do what we want with. And in this sense, God is like the ocean, and we are like a glass. And you take this glass, and you dip it into the ocean, and you ask yourself, what do I have when I dip this glass into the ocean? What I have here is a glass of God. It's not as big, it's not as strong, it's not as omniscient, it's not as omnipotent, but it is still God. And just like a wave on the ocean is what the ocean is doing, you are what God is doing. And you just have to know this. That when you take a drop of the ocean and separate it from the ocean, and you look at this drop, it is weak, it is powerless, it can do almost nothing, and it will just dissipate. If you unite it with its source, it will regain all of its strength. When you separate yourself from this divinity, and just go it alone and see yourself as independent of it and separate from it, you will become impotent. When you reunite, it's what we call surrendering the little mind to the big mind. When you rejoin that and understand that know ye that ye are God's, then you can transcend this paradigm that says, I can't manifest. I can't do all of these things. You've got to know this within yourself. You've got to discover it on a knowing level, not a believing level, and see the sacredness within yourself. When you do, you begin to practice at a higher and a higher level. Imagine that you're no longer the cookie thief, but that you indeed have suspended all doubt and have within you a knowing that this is possible for me to put my attention on what I would like to be able to manifest. Whatever it is, whether it's a healing, whether it's a child, whether it's a relationship, whether it's abundance, whether it's a promotion, whether it's a victory in a tennis match that you've never had, whatever it is that you would like to be able to manifest, if you put your attention on that and leave the physical domain, leave the right-hand side of the room, and enter over here into that which is the cause of everything over here, of which you are a part. You are not separate from that which creates. You are what God is doing. Your ego has separated you with your self-importance, with what offends you, with what hurts you, with what angers you. But who you are is that which was never born. Who you are is that which can never die. That which never changes is all that is authentic. All the rest of it is just dust. You know, you pick up something like this, you pick up something like this, you say, where was the iron that's in my blood before I showed up here? In this finite supply of iron that is on this planet. Where was it? In the bats of a wing in the Jurassic period. Who knows? It's just a constant circulation. It isn't anything that you create. What you do when you go to this side is you enter into the kingdom of manifestation. The paradigm that you're looking at is, number one, being independent of the good opinion of other people, transcending tribal consciousness, and not being afraid of being God. And not thinking of that as some kind of blasphemy, where how can I be God? I mean, isn't the worst insult you can say to the greatest egomaniac, I mean, this guy thinks he's God. And what's wrong with that? We are all extensions of God. If you go out here and look in the outside and look at the flowers, you'll see many, many different colors. You'll see reds and oranges and pinks and blues. And ask yourself, where do all of those flowers come from? They all come from light. All color comes from light. There's only one light, with many different physical manifestations. And so we have one essence with many different physical manifestations, but we are all connected by that essence. I've been talking about the right-hand side of the room and the left-hand side of the room. On the right-hand side of the room is the physical world. Everything in your physical world has a duality. Ups and downs, tops and bottoms, inside and outside. Have you ever seen a person with a front who doesn't have a back? Have you ever seen someone with an inside who doesn't have an outside? The nature of the physical domain is duality. When you talk about spiritual masters, you're talking about what they call in India non-dual beings. People who've transcended the duality. If it was always light, 24 hours a day, would we have a concept called darkness? We wouldn't know such a thing as darkness. But name something on the physical plane that could never experience darkness. It's impossible for it to know darkness. And you only can come up with the sun. Why can the sun never experience darkness? Because it's the source of all light. How do you transcend the duality of the physical plane? You go to your source. Your source is that invisible energy that doesn't have any boundaries, that is the cause of the tomato seed, that is the cause of the stem, that is the cause of the plant, that is the cause of the blossom, that is the cause of the tomato. It's invisible. And the only way to go to your source, Melville once told us, God's one and only voice is silence. You go to the place that can't be further divided. Like in your numbers, you go to zero. When you multiply by zero, when you divide zero, you end up with zero. When you go to silence and you multiply it and divide it, you still come up with zero. That's your source. And from the position of your source, silence, quietness, you begin to transcend the duality. And then you can bring into this physical world anything that you put your attention on. And then when you retreat, as it says in A Course in Miracles, infinite patience produces immediate results. And the reason that's true is because instantly when you have the patience, it's like you no longer demand of God. When people say, you mean I can win the lottery with this? I say, well, how would you feel if you won the lottery? Well, I'd feel great. I'd feel honored. I'd feel secure. I'd feel blissful. I'd feel happy, ecstatic. Well, the illusion is that you have to have numbers fit in to have that. You just have to let go and let the universe handle the details and know that it will show up. It might not show up the way you want it to, but the peace, when you retreat in peace and have infinite patience with that knowing, is your reward. There's an old saying that says, I ask for everything in my life. I ask for everything in order that I might enjoy life. And I was given life in order that I might enjoy everything. It's a different shift altogether. And what I'd like to do as I leave you is share with you one of the great teachings that I had about how to get to my source. And it goes back to these 4 paths that I opened up with, that Bagger Vance was talking to the great golfers, Bobby Jones and Walter Hagen, back in 1931. These 4 paths of wisdom correlate with what Carl Jung called the 4 stages or archetypes that we go through in our adult life. He said the lowest stage as an adult is a stage that is called the stage of the athlete. And this is a stage in our adult life when our primary emphasis and our attention is on our physical appearance, what we can get, how attractive we are, how strong we are, and what we look like, and how much we can lift and how fast we can run. That's the first stage and the lowest stage. He said the second stage, which equates with, that's the path of discipline, which equates with the path of wisdom, is the stage of the warrior. And this is the time when we take our physical body out into the world and attempt to do what warriors do, to conquer, to correct, to collect, to compare, to get as much as we can, to say, what are my quotas, what's in it for me? I have to get it before somebody else does. This is the time of all of our goal setting and our attention on what we want for ourselves and our lives. And many of us spend our whole life there. And you'll come back until you learn how to transcend it. He said the third stage, which equates to the stage of unconditional love, is called the stage of the statesman. And this is the time when ultimately you finally say in your adult life, I'm no longer concerned with my own quotas. What are yours? How may I serve becomes your mantra, rather than what's in it for me. And all of your attention begins to shift to this idea of being a statesman, or a stateswoman, or a statesperson. This whole idea, whatever field you're in, whatever it is that you do, whether you're a dentist or a cab driver or a banker or a housewife or a mother or whatever it is that you do, your attention is on, how may I serve? And then you begin to understand what Thoreau was talking about when he said, if you advance confidently in the direction of your own dreams and endeavor to live the life which you have imagined, you will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. You take your attention off of chasing after it and allow it to flow. You don't interrupt the divine energy, which is like water. It is always flowing. You don't try to stop it. But the ultimate stage is what is called the stage of the spirit. And this is the time when you finally recognize that this is not my home. This is not where I live. This is just a temporary residence. As Jesus said, be in this world, but not of this world. And you come to know that you're not of this world. You're the observer. You're the noticer. You're the witness. You're not what you witness. And from this perspective over here, you can manifest anything you choose. I've been talking up here for the past 90 minutes almost, and in these 90 minutes I've been talking about consciousness and spirit and soul. What I'd like to close with, ladies and gentlemen, as you begin this Sacred Living Conference with so many of my friends here, I'd like to have you listen to a beautiful song. It's a song that was written by a man who was a sea captain, and he was living a life of what he called ego. He was trading slaves in 1869 for money, and he had an awakening, a satori, in an instant. And he wrote a song that has become the most spiritual song probably that we've ever heard. But I'd like you to hear it sung for the first time by a woman who accompanied myself and Marianne Williamson and Louise Hay and Deepak Chopra to Australia a couple of years ago. Her name is Cecilia. She's the first person in the history of the Oslo Conservatory of Music to ever go through their entire program with a perfect score on all facets of voice. She can reach the 10th octave and create the color purple or violet with her voice on a spectrograph. She has perhaps the most powerful, beautiful voice I've ever heard. And she sings this song. Another name for this thing called God or soul or spirit is grace. And grace, as it says in the song, I once was lost, and now I'm found. And it was grace that taught my heart to feel. And it was grace that brought me home. You find that grace, you go to that place, and you will know what your sacred self is all about. So here is Cecilia, one of the finest singers alive, and I listen to this every day with the sound of the whales accompanying her. Amazing Grace.